Great. All right, let's get started. Good morning. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Regional Plan Implementation Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, May 24th, 2023, and it is, what is that, 9:38 or so. First item on the agenda is roll call to determine quorum. Maria?
Ms. Alding,
Here.
Ms. Dis,
Here, sorry.
Ms. Gustafson,
Here.
Ms. Hill,
Here.
Mr. Honigman,
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you. I will now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for May 24th, 2023. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you'll be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in number to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I would like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they're able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment and you will be called to the front to speak. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into your microphone in front of you. If you're viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. All right, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there are.
Great. All right, then we will deem the agenda approved as posted. And now we're on the next item, item number 3, approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes from March 22nd, 2023 on page 19. Do any members of the committee wish to make a change?
Right. Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I did have a few minor clerical changes that I've shared with Maria. So with that, I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the March 22nd, 2023 minutes as amended.
Great. All right, so we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone object? Nope. All right, the motion passes. And this brings us to the next agenda item, informational presentation on proposed amendments to the City of South Lake Tahoe's Tahoe Valley Area Plan and Tourist Core Area Plan that would expand housing opportunities and community equity by increasing density allowances and establishing minimum densities in town centers, allowing more housing types such as employee housing, shared housing, and group home facilities, improvements to residential design standards to help streamline project review, and policies to support town center revitalization using special events, coverage exemptions, and CFA policy declarations. Additionally, amendments would increase consistency with recently amended TRPA regulations and state regulations regarding accessory dwelling units and density bonuses for affordable housing. Information on this agenda item can be found on pages 177 and 191 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person or be called on in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. All right, John is going to introduce this item with staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John Hester here for the record. I'm actually going to give you a little context for all 3 items and then turn it over to Alyssa. So today, collectively between the City of South Lake Tahoe, the climate smart amendments and the mixed use discussion, you're going to hear 10 or 12 topics ranging from residential density to mixed use and floor area ratio, housing, land uses, parking, complete streets, EV charging, etc. I'm not going to read them all. And some of them will be mentioned by just one group. Some of them will be mentioned by 2 or 3 of the presentations. One of the points about that is and Shelley will remember this, when we adopted the amendments to the regional plan in 2012, at the request of local governments, we started put this concept of area plans together for them to develop plans in their own jurisdictions. One of the things we had hoped, and is what we're seeing today, is that now we would have good ideas coming up from the local governments through their area plans, as well as good ideas that come from TRPA's work. And so what you'll see here is a synergy. You'll see some ideas coming from both places. And what we are going to do as staff, and we've asked the other folks doing presentations, is we're going to listen to all 3 presentations, and at the end, turn to you, Mr. Chair, and ask that you summarize the suggestions that you all as a committee think are important that came from all 3 presentations. For our work, I know the city will tell you more about their process and the different venues they're gathering information from, but just wanted to give you that context, because this is really we think a good policy discussion, and get some good suggestions for the work going forward for staff. So with that as a little context for the board members, turn it over to Alyssa Bettinger, who has been working with the city of South Lake Tahoe to introduce this specific item.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us today. My name is Alyssa Bettinger. I'm a senior planner with TRPA, and I'm here to introduce the City of South Lake Tahoe area plan amendments. I'm joined by Anna Kashuba and Madison Diedrich today from the city, who will be, I'll turn it over to them in just a minute. Next slide, please. Area plans were first introduced as part of the 2012 regional plan update. And as John mentioned, they are a critical component of regional plan implementation. They bring regional plan concepts and strategies down to the local level and allow adaptation of regulations to fit the local context. Currently, the city has 2 area plans. The Tahoe Valley area plan was first approved by the governing board in 2015. And it encompasses the area known as the Y. It's a lot of commercial commercial and tourist residential on kind of the south end of town. The other area plan is the tourist core area plan that was approved by the governing board in 2013. That area encompasses the State Line Ski Run area of South Lake Tahoe. Next slide, please. There are a number of policies in your packet today, but in general, the city area plan amendments focus on updating policies that would support workforce housing, economic development and revitalization of town centers, and improving transportation options. This is an informational item at RPIC. The purpose of today's presentation is really to gather input from you all on the conceptual policy changes before city staff goes back and does the red line changes to the actual area plan document itself, as well as the environmental review. Once those red line changes and environmental document have been submitted to TRPA, we'll review them for conformance with the regional plan and code. And if any inconsistencies that have regional implications outside of the city limits, staff would recommend that those proposals would not be approved when the amendments come through the formal adoption process. That would include RPIC, APC, and governing board approval. And we're anticipating, or the city anticipates, that that would begin in the fall. I also want to note that these are 2 agenda items, but because the amendments are very similar in nature, we're just going to do one presentation on both of them. So with that, I will pass it over to Anna and Madison.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us. To introduce myself, Madison Diedrich. My name is Madison Diedrich. I am an assistant planner with the city of South Lake Tahoe. My area of focus is going to be the tourist core area plan. However, as mentioned, both the area plans have a lot of similar concepts that we will be presenting.
My name is Anna Kashuba. I'm an assistant planner for the city of South Lake Tahoe. I'm taking the lead on the Tahoe Valley area plan. And again, just to reiterate, the presentation does cover changes to both the area plans, and unless otherwise noted, the proposed changes are applicable to both.
We can go to the next slide. So to start off, just what are area plans? They're comprehensive land use planning documents which provide specific development objectives and standards. They really allow for planning with greater flexibility for a community scale, along with providing a framework for increase in redevelopment and property investment. In terms of the city and TRPA, it also creates a central permitting mechanism. Next slide. So just to provide a little bit more context about the tourist core area plan, I just want to go over some of the key portions of the vision statement. The tourist core area plan is a central destination that provides full services for both tourists and permanent residents. The idea is to create a sustainable outdoor tourism recreational destination with active streetscapes, with shopping, entertainment, and a lot of outdoor dining opportunities, as well as focus on transit and alternative travel as an essential part of the envisioned destination. Next slide. So just some of the implementation that has occurred on the tourist core area plan so far. They really guide implementation and provide development standards and incentives. So some examples of some of the private redevelopment are the Hampton Inn, Desolation Hotel, and the Biggio Marketplace. They also promote area-wide stormwater infrastructure. You can see quite a few like the US 50/Wildwood area, the Biggio Park Creek SEZ restoration. Next slide.
So here we have a look at some of the specifics to the Tahoe Valley area plan. These are some key points from the vision statement: to provide a healthy balance of commerce, employment, entertainment, and livability, to encourage retail businesses and services that meet local needs, encourage local ownership, and appeal to visitors seeking to mix with the local community. This area is really tailored to local resident needs. And then lastly, to welcome visitors entering the city from the scenic corridors of US 50 and State Route 89. I think it's important to note for a lot of individuals entering the basin or the city, this is the first introduction they have. And then I also want to note a previous amendment that was made to this area plan in 2021. This was related to the Sugar Pine Village. You see here the changes that were made as part of those amendments. Those were made on the TRPA end. On the city end, they were applied to the project through a waiver received from the state for affordable housing projects. And during this round of amendments, we do intend to implement these same changes. Next slide, please. So here's a look at some of the improvements that were made to the Tahoe Valley area plan under the current policies and strategies. So in red, we have some private developments. There's gym, health center, housing, and mixed use projects. There were also transportation and circulation improvements, which included additional striping and indicators for bike lanes, rehab, repaving, as well as brand new bike trails. And then lastly, we have SC stream environment zone restoration programs and water quality improvements, like the airport to the Y junction, the Y to Trout Creek, and Y to Cascade Road. Most of these included installation of shoulders to the streets, as well as bike paths, curbs, and gutters to help with water quality improvements. Next slide, please.
So to this point, staff has successfully implemented the area plans that are currently established. That being said, these current amendments, they're looking to implement the city's housing element policies, incentivize transportation and connectivity, increase consistency with state laws regarding housing and parking, explore ways to activate our town centers, and just general improvement in code corrections. Next slide. So just to get general overview process of what the city has done so far and where we are headed. So in February, we had both a stakeholder workshop and a planning commission workshop where we received feedback on the same topics that you will be receiving today for the most part. Based on that feedback, a couple changes have been made. The Tahoe Valley area plan has been presented and received feedback from our city council. The tourist core area plan was originally going to be on that, but was continued to the June 6th meeting. So we will be, again, presenting very similar information to the city council and getting feedback from them. So today we want to share our ideas, receive feedback from you, and any sort of other context or information you guys may be able to provide. Once we've kind of had all this feedback, we will be moving on to kind of, again, drafting the environmental reports and redlining our documents, and then it'll go for city adoption and then eventually back over to TRPA. Next slide.
So as Madison mentioned, a large goal of these amendments is to increase residential opportunities. The first area we're looking at to achieve that goal is through our residential densities. We're looking at increasing the maximum density. Around 65 was the original number we were looking at. Based on previous feedback we've received, there is definitely interest in going beyond that. We are also looking to set a minimum standard of 8 units per acre. This would help prevent underutilization of properties that are close to amenities and close to transportation. It also can kind of help shift to a more affordable by design residential units that are naturally smaller in size due to having more on the parcel. We recently adopted, or last year adopted, our accessory dwelling unit ordinance. That is something that we intend to make applicable to the area plans as well. We're also considering the level of review for residential projects. Currently, projects that require bonus units are put through a longer review process, having to have additional review before approval. We see this as inequitable and an additional requirement for affordable projects that market rate projects do not have. The goal of the city of South Lake Tahoe, as well as the state of California, is to streamline permitting for affordable projects. So again, we're looking to kind of move in that direction. Not here on the slide, but definitely important to mention is the exploration of mitigation for loss of residential units. This can look like something like prohibiting redevelopment to lower densities or requiring a fee for lost units. And again, this is just to ensure that we are not losing housing in the basin. And then on a broader note, but definitely still in the housing realm, our city council is in discussions regarding an inclusionary housing ordinance. Again, this is kind of at a higher level than area plans, but whatever is decided that at that level would apply to the area plans. So this would be a requirement for residential projects to include a certain percentage that are either sold or rented at affordable levels. Next slide, please. Next, we're considering changing some of the use definitions. So one of the goals here is to create consistency between areas that allow multi-person employee housing and multifamily housing. From a land use perspective, these uses function in very similar ways. So it's kind of odd that there is an inconsistency with where they are allowed. We're also looking to expand the general retail and personal service category to include health and athletic clubs, day spas, and funeral parlors. We are also looking to consolidate the two existing uses, amusement and recreation, and assembly and entertainment, into one category. There's currently extensive overlap between the characteristics of these categories. So the one approach would be to combine those two categories. That being said, we do understand that being a broad category, there is sometimes, that allows for very different projects to fall within there. So we're also exploring within that category having a capacity threshold. So projects that are over a certain capacity and would have more, say, noise, parking, traffic implications would require a higher level of review, such as a special use permit. Next slide, please.
All right, the next thing we kind of want to talk about is revitalization. Economic development is an area we really want to target in these area plans. So the first kind of note is allowing advertising for accessory uses. Currently, accessory uses, say a restaurant has a hotel, they're not allowed to advertise. We're looking to change that so that advertising can be allowed for accessory uses. However, the overall signage wouldn't change. They would still be subject to existing maximum sign areas and number allowed signs. So if you wanted to, advertise your restaurant in your hotel, you're going to have to decrease your signage somewhere else in order to do that. The next thing we will be targeting is our commercial design standards, and really just making this more objective and aligned with a lot of state requirements. Some of these things will be requiring design elements, building modulation, And then one specific thing in terms of commercial design standards, just for the tourist core area plan, we're looking to increase the height from 56 feet to 65 feet in the mixed use district. This would be to accommodate a mixed use project with a pitched roof design. This comes from project modeling of 3900 Lake Tahoe Boulevard and making it feasible with a certain amount of density. Next slide. So part of this same economic development is outdoor dining and commercial floor area will also kind of be addressed as this. And again, really targeting activating our streetscapes. One of the big things is creating consistency between CFA requirements for outdoor seating versus outdoor dining. They are currently different. If it is outdoor seating, which is when you just take your food from a counter and you go and sit down, that does not require CFA. Whereas outdoor dining is when you have table service, that does require CFA. So we want to create some consistency between those, working with TRPA. And then we also want to, following this, develop standards that would allow outdoor dining up to potentially a designated maximum amount of square footage that would not be subject to CFA requirements, or working in some way to, again, accommodate more outdoor dining. Next slide.
So this slide covers some considerations on the traffic and circulation front and how to prepare and allow for a transition from vehicle traffic and personal automobiles to a more active and public transportation landscape. I'm not going to go into each of these bullet points. They are all kind of suggestions and ideas to help achieve that goal that would offer accommodations for alternative modes of transportation in place of vehicles parking spaces. For example, this first one would be a reduction in parking spaces for right-of-way improvements beyond the project street frontage. Generally, a project is only required to do that sidewalk for the frontage of that parcel width. There could possibly be an opportunity if a developer chose to expand that sidewalk for a parcel or two down to connect with existing infrastructure, and then they would be allowed to reduce the parking spaces by one or two, whatever that equivalency is determined to be. So the rest of those bullet points are kind of just suggestions as well in that same spirit of moving away from personal automobile transportation and doing that at the same time as increasing opportunities for pedestrian and bicycle transit. Next slide, please.
All right, so in kind of a similar context of transportation and circulation, accommodating electric vehicle infrastructure and other sustainable infrastructure is something we want to address. We really want to encourage improvements to our infrastructure, especially to facilitate electrical vehicles. A lot of this will be reducing constraints related to coverage maximums and transfer requirements, potentially exemptions or ministerial mitigation processes. I know later on in another agenda item, you guys will be talking a little bit more about some of the TRPA specific concepts. We are just looking a lot at this point, trying to get feedback on broad of how we can help streamline the EV process. Next slide. So what you've heard so far have been a lot of the broad concepts for both of the area plans. What we're going to move into a little bit is more related to each area plan specifically and some of the expansions and changes we want to make. So the first one you see is an area plan expansion for the tourist core. We have two parcels that would be incorporated into the tourist center neighborhood mixed use. Currently, they are both hotel or motels. We want to incorporate them into this district, which would allow the uses to be housing or professional uses. Everything else would require either a special use permit or not allowed. The idea of incorporating these two parcels into the area plan is that they would benefit from increases in density and coverage, as well as other incentives for redevelopment. Next slide. All right, so then this would not be an expansion of the area plan, but just a district change. Many of you may be familiar with this. We have a private application in for this parcel. And in order to consolidate some of our amendments, the city has incorporated all pending private amendments into our process. So we have included this. This is the first time this is being presented. It was added a little bit later in the process of feedback. So we are very open to receiving your guys' thoughts on this. A few notes I want to make on this. It is currently zoned as recreation, and it would be rezoned to the tourist center mixed use. Within the general plan, this is zoned as tourist center, and the portion being considered is high capacity or high capability land within a town center. The SEZ areas of this parcel or the parcel next door would not be impacted. The rezoning would allow for residential uses, tourist accommodation uses, general retail and personal services, professional offices, as well as resource management and open space. Next slide.
So now we're looking at changes to the Tahoe Valley area plan specific to that plan, specifically expansions of the town or the area plan boundaries. This first area we're looking at between Eloise and James off of Tahoe Keys Boulevard. As Madison mentioned, this was also a private application. It was originally a plan area statement amendment application the city had received, and we are now working it into this overall process. The application was a single parcel to have the permissible uses changed. So we having it part of this broader area plan amendment process allows us to look at it holistically, as well as the other parcels in the area. These highlighted parcels you see are a mix of multifamily, single family, and low intensity commercial uses such as law offices and medical and dental offices. Staff identified these uses as compatible with the neighborhood professional district. So we could see this as an expansion to that district. It also would bring some existing uses in this area that are legal non-conforming into conformance. Next slide, please. The second area of consideration to expand the area plan, you see here, number 2 along Melba Drive, similar to the reasons I just discussed for the first area. Incorporating these parcels would allow for legal non-conforming uses to come into compliance, as well as redevelopment incentives such as land coverage and density for the multiple parcels in this area that are currently multifamily. And lastly, we are looking at including a new district, which would be the focus of which would be for residential development. Most of these parcels are currently in the Bonanza Special Area 1 Plan Area Statement, which is currently primarily for single family or multifamily dwelling use. Including these parcels into the area plan, however, that list of permissible uses would not significantly change, but these parcels would be allowed to be able to be developed at higher densities, as well as having the minimum density applied. The majority of these parcels are high capability and are vacant. Next slide. And this is just a look at how the town center could possibly change should these areas be incorporated. The first 2 areas up between James and Eloise and along Melba, those are eligible to be included as a town center. However, the residential district is not. Next slide. That concludes our presentation, and if there are any questions, we're happy to discuss.
All right, any comments or questions from committee members?
Thank you, ladies, for your presentations. Let's see. So I'm looking, let's see, this would be the TVAP, Tahoe Valley plan. In the presentation or in the packet we have under residential density on page 181, it says the city is requesting that the allowed density bonus reference in TRPA Code of Ordinances 31.4.1 be applicable to all properties where multifamily residential is an allowed use, including properties within area plans, is this in general or only in town centers? Because the spirit of the regional plan was to increase density in town centers where there is transportation available for people living there and where there are essential services available.
I believe that would just be for town centers. So I
Town
think the
centers.
intent is that was a possibly a newer TRPA ordinance section that was not applicable when the area plan was initially adopted. And so the intent would just to make sure that applies as intended by the TRPA code.
Okay, great. So there's also provision proposed amendments will also include a requirement to mitigate any reduction in density from existing conditions. I understand the concern about the loss of affordable units, but would you, disincentivize developers, to lower densities in order to incorporate more amenities or open space as a quality of life improvement? Because I think that would be kind of regressive.
So currently in the area plan, there is a requirement for open space for residential parcels or residential developments. So I think that would not be compromising that.
And I think we're definitely open for any sort of feedback you guys have. I think the intent is that housing is very important because we are proposing something very similar in both area plans. It's still a very general concept, so we're open to that feedback, but I think generally the idea is that we want to make sure that we are preserving housing and those densities so that.
No, and I understand that. I think you need to build into the system a little more flexibility. I mean, some of these things are going to be subjective. And I don't think it should be a hard and fast rule, that you disincentivize a reduction. It might be a minor reduction in density when there are, offsetting improvements that'll improve the quality of living for the people occupying those units. So that's my only question. Let's not be too rigid. Let's see. So under permissible uses, first of all, it's kind of a flashback to the 1960s. You're talking about communes. I mean, I don't think there's even a provision in our code that would permit that sort of cohabitation. I may be wrong, but I looked at our definition of the uses. We've got community apartments and we've got residential units, which include collective household living with facilities for living, cooking, sleeping, and eating. But what exactly is envisioned there? And this would be on page 182 of our packets, and it's not considered a group home, which is a residential care facility. It's a shared housing or co-living project. I'm just kind of curious what you had in mind.
Are you talking, just to clarify, about creating consistency between the definitions of multi-person employee and multifamily housing?
Well, there are, it says that the city will reevaluate Appendix C, Table 1, permitted uses by land use district, a list of primary uses and use definitions, and consider the following adjustments. And one of those adjustments is to define shared housing or co-living projects in compliance with AB 682, which is a California legislative action, I guess, and allow them where multifamily dwelling and multi-person dwelling uses are allowed. I'm just kind of curious, what do you envision?
So that's specifically correct. That is a state law that and that is how some employee housing facilities are defined. I think how this would actually look in our area plans is I think kind of, if I understood as you alluded to, that kind of setup can already be built under some of these use definitions. So the intent was to specifically, I think, increase opportunities for housing across the board. Currently, employee housing requires a special use permit in areas where multi-person or multifamily are allowed by right. And so it would be just to, again, this is in accordance with the California Employee Housing Act as well, to streamline and remove that special use barrier from employee housing projects.
Okay, well, it doesn't, I guess it's a little confusing, at least for me, because it didn't say it was employee housing. So I envisioned something like a giant open room, like an auditorium with people, sleeping on sleeping bags on the floor. I mean, that sort of cohabitation. I think you have to be tightened up on those definitions, because if this is specifically for employee housing, then that's, I think, what should be said, just so people don't have a kind of a view of what this might be or what it might become, like a flop house or something. So that would be my recommendation, to tighten that up. And then under the same permissible use section, it says, identify where legal non-conforming uses exist and consider if these uses should be allowed. But then on page 186, you reference TRPA code 31.4.6, which says that that code provision is intended to ensure that legal non-conforming tourist or residential densities can be maintained and managed pursuant to that section. I mean, TRPA has a code provision that basically allows non-conforming uses to be maintained unless there's an application to change that use. So there seems to be kind of a discontinuity between what you're proposing here by considering eliminating those legal non-conforming uses and what the TRPA code provides. So
city code also has something very similar, maintaining legal non-conforming. The intention of what we are kind of proposing in here is to look for areas where potentially something is non-conforming right now, but it is an appropriate use, and maybe other businesses would want to change to a very similar use. For example, we have one area in the tourist core area plan where eating and drinking is not allowed, or it requires a special use permit. You know, changing things like that to be like, hey, that use makes sense. That's what we're more looking at. There are areas where, again, legal non-conforming uses exist. They make sense. We should consider that for the whole
Okay.
area.
okay, all right. So my interpretation of that was different. So maybe we need to kind of rephrase that, because I thought that you were going to take a look at these legal non-conforming uses and determine whether or not they should be allowed to continue. So that's obviously in conflict with your code. It's in conflict with our code. So maybe you need to kind of expand on that language to really clearly define your intent. And that is to maybe legitimize these uses that are now legally non-conforming, but have benefit. So if you could just maybe address that, that would be wonderful. And then I guess we all received a copy of a letter from the League to Save Lake Tahoe regarding the TCAP and the Van Sickle parcel, so-called Van Sickle parcel. I know that this is going to require our legal counsel to weigh in at some point on this issue as to whether or not what representations were made when the Colony Inn was demolished. And there was an attempt to restore the SEZ in that area, but the League is pretty adamant that they feel that the commitment was to allow that to remain as open space. I guess I'm not taking a position on that right now, but obviously that I think is going to be of some concern to members of this committee and the board in general. Okay, and that's it. Thank you.
Any other comments from committee members?
I just want to commend the city in bringing this back. I know we've had some fits and starts and separate individual projects that came forward ahead of these amendments. I think this is a great step forward, and looking at how we better educate our public, especially on the importance of density in our town centers if we're going to achieve our goals in transportation. It's so critical to having those density increases if we're really going to see increased transit use and walkability of our town centers. So appreciate the efforts that go into looking at the complicated codes and sections and various laws that we have to contend with. And I think you've done a great job. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. John, did you want us, you said we were going to kind of hear these as three, and then I have some comments, but I didn't know if you wanted to wait until the end for kind of a
Well, I think at this point, it would be appropriate to give the city comments on their
Okay.
proposals. At the end, we'll
talk about general.
try to talk
region.
about what we heard that applies to our work
Okay.
going forward, but right now, I think these have all been city specific.
Okay, great. I have a few comments then, since no other committee members have any. One, I was wondering if you guys, the city did any study on the economics of the proposals to see if they will in fact create the desired outcomes, because, as planners, we set rules and regulations, but we aren't the ones who actually do the work. And it only gets done if it makes economic sense. And so I was wondering if you brought in anyone to, or if you did the analysis on these changes to see if they will induce the development that you want to see, affordable housing and higher densities in the core areas.
So we have done a lot of outreach with, the public and whatnot. We haven't pulled in any sort of consultant. These are meant to just be amendments, nothing major, no major changes, just little things that we can tweak here and there to help promote or clarify the goals that are already within the area plan. The biggest change that is kind of occurring does revolve around that density. We have been keeping a close eye on what TRPA is doing, and depending on kind of the direction and feedback we're getting from both RPIC and then our city council, if something further needs to be addressed, then that will be something we can consider.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, the city is also on the Tahoe Living Working Group, and I know they've seen all the work Cascadia has done on what the pro formas say, so I'm sure that's something you've looked at.
So I'm new on that committee, so I I forgot you guys were members. Great, because I think that that's really critical. We want this to happen. We want affordable housing to be built, as much of the housing built in the basin to be affordable as possible. So we just want to make sure that that's what we're getting. And in that vein, I would recommend, and I think it's the direction that we'll be going forward with, is changing the density limits to more of a form-based code, because density limits along with parking requirements drive large luxury units. And if you don't have those two things, you'll get much smaller units that are naturally more affordable. So I think that would be something to really look at. So changing that out, and also reducing the parking requirements, especially if it's affordable or achievable housing. I'm sorry, I tend to use those terms interchangeably. Let's see, I had a question where you said some of the parcels were currently vacant. Is that they're built out but vacant, or are they, virgin undisturbed land? I guess, because for me, that's a different thing.
Is this in reference to the area plan expansions? Those are, majority of them are untouched. Never been built upon, yes.
Okay. And I think Shelley is right. The co-housing thing, I read it one way, because I've seen projects that are coming up and I've always wanted to do one and we never have, but where you mean probably something, it's where kitchens are communal and some living spaces, but separate units. It's almost more like a family dorm environment is kind of the model that people are doing around the country. Is that what you're intending?
Correct, yes.
Okay, because that would be good to clarify. I didn't read it as a as a giant warehouse or so yeah, we
1960s commune.
yeah, we don't want to see that, but I think we would like to see the other, because it's an interesting living form that is cheaper and some people are excited about. And then I agree with Shelley about talking about those parcels with the league, and I see Gavin back there, so I know we'll get his comments. I don't know the history of it, but it is near to what's currently a pretty high density area. So for me, I would like to see more density in areas that are high density, but if we're taking away something, then we need to give it back. And if there's any kind of, if there's a trade, unless that's a really special property, I don't know it, but if it's, if we're taking away something, we need to give it back. But if it is tradable, that seems like a good place to put it to me. So just wanted to put that out there as something to think about. So that's mine. Any other committee comments? No? All right, then I think we'll open it up to public comments. So first we'll go to people who are with us today in person. All right, I see we have Lou coming to the podium, so.
Morning, Mr. Chair, committee members, Lou Feldman on a variety of topics that have been raised, and I want to really compliment the city for bringing these proposed amendments forward. In no particular order, but since there's been some comment about the parcel adjacent to the stream environment zone restoration, I just think it's important to realize there is a single parcel that happens to have split zoning. So the front half of that closest to Montreal Road or the shopping center is already approved with a development permit for development. The back half of the project of the parcel, the single parcel, is the subject of this expanded zoning to clarify that one parcel might enjoy singular zoning. Not a big stretch, but we're not going to resolve that today, but just wanted to highlight the fact that development's going to occur there, already permitted, building permits already issued. So I appreciate the city including that in the process. I guess sort of the elephant in the room, which I applaud the city again for addressing, this distinction between outdoor dining that is self-seated and outdoor dining where there's actually a wait person, one requiring CFA and one not requiring CFA, is something we just need to fix. We have more examples of a violation of this rule than conformance with the rule. So thank you, city, for bringing that forward, and hopefully other jurisdictions, if not the agency itself, will legitimize reality. That's kind of an interesting phrase. And anyhow, certainly the additional height and density to promote workforce housing is a very important addition. And there's a anomaly in TRPA's code that only an employer can construct employee housing. And why would you foreclose a property owner who wants to construct and have properly restricted employee housing from developing employee housing? That makes no sense. So I think that's a excellent cleanup. And lastly, I guess, there are, in every major hotel development, there is, some form of accessory use, food and beverage, other uses that, we prohibit separately advertising. And again, to me, that is just an archaic rule that makes no sense. So great job in terms of the cities bringing forward some infrastructure advances, and applaud the effort and look forward to it advancing. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public who's with us? All right.
Morning. I apologize in advance. I'm just on the tail end of a cold, so my voice is a little hoarse. My name is Seth Daleb. My partners, investors, and I built over 500 units of workforce, affordable housing, non-tax subsidized in the Seattle area. And I've been living in the Tahoe area for about 1.5 years now. Nothing would make me happier than to build workforce affordable housing here. I wanted to reemphasize what I did at the city council meeting, that even the increased density units proposed here are not going to be enough to get someone to come in from the open market and build workforce affordable housing. 60 units per acre, roughly speaking, will get you 800 to 1,000 square foot apartments, which will rent for $2,500 to $3,000 a month. That's just the economics of the world we live in right now. So what I would suggest is keep a height restriction, because that will limit the amount of units, and you don't want to have high-rise buildings in Lake Tahoe, and I get that. But the rest of these restrictions in terms of density, in terms of parking requirements, in terms of land coverage units, all of these things cost money, and they all come out in the end in the form of rent. These specific area plans present an excellent opportunity because you can put the housing for the employees where the jobs are. You'll reduce vehicle miles traveled. You'll be within walking distance of a lot of the jobs where these types of folks will live. One other thing I wanted to address was some previous stakeholder comments that were in the record, where there was a comment saying, oh, if we have higher density, it'll result in smaller units, and that might not match with what renters want, and you'll have this market mismatch. Let me take that risk. I will take that risk. Right now, the alternative isn't a smaller housing unit versus a larger housing unit. These folks live in Carson City, they live out of the area, they drive up, or they're living 5, 6 to a single family house that's 70 years old. Having smaller units is not a bad thing. We can make affordable, livable, safe, clean, new, truly affordable, non-tax subsidized units for folks that respect the environment and are low impact to the environment. But all of these well-intentioned limits and caps conspire to make it just not feasible. So I look forward to working more with the city. I look forward to introducing myself more to you guys and hopefully build some of these workforce housing units. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? All right.
Thank you. Lynn Barnett with Wells Barnett Associates, representing the South Tahoe Association of Realtors. We have an existing public service office building in the area that's proposed to be added to the Tahoe Valley Area Plan between James and Eloise. As was mentioned, we had a plan area amendment application that was for that area, and we're very happy that this is being wrapped into the Tahoe Valley Area Plan. We're hoping that that area also is eventually added to the town center. And I want to thank the city staff. They've been very good meeting with us and listening to our concerns. This neighborhood, by the way, it's a special area today in a residential plan area statement. Back in the early 80s, when that special area designation was granted, the TRPA recognized that it was a mixed use neighborhood. So it has existing commercial and residential, and of course, public service with the Star property. And again, I just want to thank everybody involved in this process and hope this moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, we got a couple. Perfect. Oh, back on.
All right, thanks. Good morning, Chair, members of the board, Kevin Pryor, Director of Lands for the Tahoe Conservancy. My comments are specific to the Tahoe Tourist Core Area Plan Amendment with the city. Specifically, the Conservancy does not support the proposed rezoning of the colony and back parcel from recreation to tourist center mixed use with the justification to accommodate higher density housing opportunities. Conservancy believes the park will be negatively impacted by the rezoning of the back parcel from recreation to tourist center mixed use. The proposed rezoning is not consistent with the land use designations or the majority of the relevant goals and policies in the RPU, the TCAP, or the general plan. This proposed rezoning should be removed from the proposed tourist core area plan amendments. We believe the Van Sickle Park will be continued to be boxed in as developers pursue one-off developments that in isolation, certain entities can view it as a zoning that has no impacts to the park. We would like to see the TCAP amendment support the SEZ restoration and the Van Sickle corner parcel permanently protected. In closing, the Conservancy staff believes the TCAP update should be looking at more ways to support the benefits of Van Sickle Park to the public in this area. The park benefits the public, the city, and is a major attraction in the tourist core. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe you were next. You've been trying, and then Gavin after. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the Regional Plan Implementation Committee. I'm Hillary Roverud, the Director of Development Services for the City of South Lake Tahoe. First, thank you, Anna and Madison. Great job on your presentations. I wanted to just put a little bit of context on what we're proposing here. So in 2012, when the regional plan was updated, it included a vision for revitalizing our town centers through increased density and intensity of uses. That was a real transformational change in vision with the regional plan in 2012. Our eyes have been opened since then, given the housing crisis that we are in now, in realizing the importance of housing as part of that revitalization of our town centers. I really appreciate Cindy Gustafson's comments about the tie with density and transit. Pretty sure everyone in this room is on some committee or in some effort to try to provide better, higher quality and more reliable transit throughout the basin. What we did here in our stakeholder workshops and public workshops that we held to receive comments on the area plan updates was general support for increasing densities in the town centers. However, also a lot of comments about the importance of providing an alternative to individual vehicles so that people are able to thrive in an environment of higher density, be able to get to their workplace and get around our communities. That was also in association with discussions about reducing parking standards. So really, we're looking at a lot of different options to try to tie those key principles in these area plan updates together. Also wanted to thank the TRPA staff on the coordination that we've had thus far. And I know going forward on these area plan updates, there's a lot going on here, a lot of different initiatives with the Tahoe Living Working Group, as well as all the local jurisdictions working on their area plans and code amendments. And coordination on that is incredibly important, if not just to reduce confusion for the public. So we have been having bi-weekly meetings with TRPA staff to go through these area plan updates, working very closely with the information that they are providing to the working group on the economics of development. This question and concern about developing, large, low density projects in our town centers is certainly something that our city council is looking at as well. That is the intent behind providing the first zoning to include a minimum density to be proposed in the Tahoe Basin, really to ensure that within that form that we are allowing to be built in, the envelope that we're allowing to be built in, that we don't wind up with low density projects that are not in line with our intent of trying to create higher density in the town center. So just wanted to provide that context that I think we're all pulling in the same direction. We're just looking at a lot of different little nuances on how to get there, and really appreciate the feedback from the RPIC.
Thank you. I think Gavin, you are next.
Are we on? Yep. Good morning, Gavin Feiger, on behalf of the League of Save Lake Tahoe. I'm going to keep this pretty short and focused. Today, we're just talking about the Van Sickle parcel, the rezoning and the TCAP amendment. After Anna and Madison's great presentation, we hear that we've got plenty of time to talk about some of the other pieces of the amendments. Hopefully you read our letter. Ditto on everything Kevin from the Conservancy said. There are short-term rentals planned for this property. It wasn't a split zone property. There were two separate properties that were joined together with two separate zonings by the developer. And the same developer owns a corner parcel that the Van Sickle entrance goes through, with short-term rentals planned for that also, fairly low density. So I just encourage you to drive by today. It's just a few minutes from here, like make a little note or a calendar reminder to swing by on your way after the meeting, see what it looks like, try to imagine what it would look like with a bunch of kind of luxury condos on it. And then if you haven't read our letter yet, please do. We outline in pretty good detail why those parcels should not be developed, period, let alone rezoned and developed more. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? All right, seeing none, we'll go to our online participants. And I forgot to read the instructions, by the way. So if any member of the public online wishes to address the committee, please raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So Anyone with us, Catherine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one hand raised online. Doug Flaherty, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee, Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. The proposed increases in density, height, coverage in the parking, decreases, increase human and roadway overcapacity, which leads to adverse cumulative incremental environmental impacts. Cumulative impacts result from the tyranny of the incremental impact of small decisions when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions, regardless of what agency or person undertakes such other actions. Cumulative impacts result from individually minor but collectively significant actions taking place over a period of time. This is what is resulting here. The TRPA and its partners are on a relentless quest to increase human and roadway overcapacity. Any of these proposed changes must undergo a complete environmental impact statement that discusses, among other environmental impacts, the dangerous overcapacity situations that are presented because of a lack of a roadway by roadway capacity, wildfire capacity evaluation. The TRPA and its partners must consider the fact that visitors and residents together are impacted by this peril. And that's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
Great, then we'll close public comment. Any other committee member comments? Nothing? Okay, hearing none. Let's see, this is an information item, so we can move on to our next item. Agenda item number 4, the Climate Smart Code update. Oh, and thank you, by the way, everyone from the city for presenting. I'm sorry, I just jump into comments without doing that, but I know that there's just a ton of work that's gone into this, so we really appreciate everything that you guys have done. Okay, so back to the Climate Smart Code updates. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 205 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on in Zoom or be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. Let's see, so Jacob, you're going to present this one. Hand it over to you.
Good morning, RPIC members, Chair, Jacob Stock, Senior Planner with TRPA. I am here to introduce a informational presentation on proposed amendments to our Code of Ordinances that would promote climate resiliency and adaptation. And lucky for you, you don't have to hear it from me. We have a group of graduate students from UC Davis, actually soon to be Masters of Science in environmental policy and management. They're here with us. We partnered with them on this project, and so I'm really excited to introduce them and the work that they've been doing in partnership with us. Next slide, please. Uh-oh, we're missing a project background. Oh, all right, well, I guess I have my slide orders wrong, but that's fine. So we didn't want this to just be a student project. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do on our code, a lot of work to do to adapt and become more resilient. So we wanted the work that we're doing with these students to be something that we're going to implement. And so this group worked really closely with me, with Devin Middlebrook as well, and Kira Smith. And I also want to shout out the permitting and compliance department who consulted with us along the way as we brought them different proposals. We had a lot of fun conversations. And I'll hand it off to our team to introduce themselves.
Hi, all. My name is Diana Heraldo. I focus in climate change science and policy, and I work in the intersection of natural resource management.
Hi, my name is Flora Rizzo, and I also am in the same program as everybody else here. And I focus on energy and transportation planning, but specifically on environmental justice topics.
Hi, my name is Cameron Kubose. I am specializing in city and regional planning, and I did my summer internship with TRPA last summer.
Hello, I'm Michael Macon. I'm interested in water resource management and climate resilience. Also, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas McNairn. I am focusing my master's in urban and regional planning with a little bit of a focus on water resource management and natural resource management.
Can we go to the next slide, please?
So last October, TRPA staff held a workshop to prioritize a list of climate smart code amendments that TRPA had been working on and that I worked on as well during the summer. So this prioritization activity allowed TRPA staff and our policy clinic group to see which ideas we should consider moving forward and work on in this immediate term. And governing board members voted on ideas as well as offered additional suggestions. And so here's a picture of the traffic and VMT reduction poster board with some stickers as votes for which ideas they liked. Next slide, please.
So a big part of the project in the beginning was kind of defining what the scope of work was going to be. And a big part of this was kind of figuring out what was going to be feasible for us to actually accomplish given the time frame that we had in TRPA's kind of resources that they had available to us. So we had to reduce the time, we had to reduce the scope of work, and eventually we ended up producing 3 deliverables, which include the outreach and participation plan, the draft code language, and then public education documents, which can be used in the future. As part of this, we had to narrow down the stakeholders that we were going to engage with. And this ended up resulting in a list of consultants and city planners and city leaders who helped us further define and kind of refine, again, the priorities that we were going to be working with. The final 4 categories were determined again on the feasibility to implement them. We had to give a lot of consideration to what we were going to be able to do given the time frame that we had. So because of this, we wanted to avoid bringing in anything that would require an additional environmental analysis. So again, through the workshops with stakeholders, we were able to narrow down everything to 4 final categories. If we could please go to the next slide. Thank you. And these final categories were the reduction of traffic congestion to and from temporary events, the promotion of electric vehicle charging, the removal of barriers to small-scale energy generation, and updating exterior light requirements for dark sky preservation.
Next slide, please. So as Flora spoke about, we created a stakeholder engagement plan and also an outreach and participation plan. These documents helped us identify who, how, and why we were going to engage the public. Our analysis led us to understand that we needed to develop a working group where we can engage with stakeholders with technical knowledge on our 4 priority topics. We conducted 3 working group meetings. The first 2 meetings, we introduced our focus areas. These meetings helped us identify any barriers, any opportunities, and gather experience from their unique expertise in order for us to begin drafting the proposed language. During the meetings, we also used interactive digital presentations where we encouraged the participants to engage using different avenues. And the picture on the right bottom shows the kind of activities that we did, where we used Jamboard and allocated an opportunity for them to give us their feedback via these platforms. During our last meeting, we went back to the stakeholders with the proposed language and received feedback in which we used to refine the proposed language. Each meeting had an average of 8 participants, and some of the people included Sarah Leeton from the city of South Lake Tahoe, Angel Green from Placer County, Courtney Wyatt from Washoe County, Matt Newberry from Liberty Utilities, and Daniel Cressy from the U.S. Forest Service. The people who were not able to join us virtually, we did engage through via email. And we also worked very closely with the permitting and compliance department, which provided us contextual background and routed us toward very much needed resources.
Next slide, please. So for the first priority amendment idea, traffic reduction from temporary events, these were the governing board priorities that was mentioned at the meeting. So promote walkability and bikeability in town centers, requiring visitor travel plans, as well as the sustainability action plan, page 4-32, which is the Events Commission sustainability action. And as you know, Tahoe experiences large events all year, and not just in North Lake or South Lake, but all around the basin. So our goal is to reduce traffic congestion and reliance on cars by promoting alternative modes of transportation. The main limitation of this is the infrastructure and the transportation programs. So we need to take into account what exists and what is planned. So after speaking with TRPA staff, we learned that a number of annual events that take place in the region don't necessarily need to pull permits from TRPA. And so that's why we recommend that TRPA work closely with local partners to ensure that transportation plans are prepared by temporary event organizers. At least one jurisdiction, City of South Lake Tahoe, has within their application process for major special events, a section for traffic, transportation, and a parking plan. So by working with local partners, TRPA can determine the best strategy given the existing infrastructure and transportation programs when developing a transportation plan requirement.
So the second focus area that we were able to work on is the promotion of electric vehicle charging. This was taken from the overall priorities and direction from the governing board that wanted to focus on streamlining the actual installation of EV charging structures. This is the way that we took the direction is to look at coverage exemptions, partial coverage exemptions, overall, the removal of barriers to efficient choices of charging. And there was a direction to address guidelines for electric watercraft. However, this was beyond our scope, and internal staff at TRPA are working on this as well. And so we decided to avoid and let TRPA handle this topic. Some key issues that we found facing the installation of EV charging infrastructure is the potential of increased cost of the actual development areas. We also want to create incentives to install these infrastructure, but we also don't want to create loopholes, especially with the addition of coverage exemptions. There's also a really interesting position that we're in where we can both incentivize but also require these ideas for redeveloped areas. Some overall goals that we have for this language is to expand access and for all EV users, but also protect thresholds. And then we want to promote universal chargers for all EV users. So going back to the access. The recommendations we bring forward to you are to set EV capable standards for all parking areas in all land use types. We want to streamline installations for all infrastructure with partial coverage exemptions. And then we also want to define chargers in the code, as well as any terms associated with charging. These ideas were taken mostly from Cal Green Code, as well as the NDOT NEVI plan in Nevada. And these are also in an attempt to cover some sustainability action plan items. Next slide, please.
Yeah, the third section. Yeah. The third section we wanted to focus on was small scale energy generation. Particularly, we narrowed our scope down to just solar energy infrastructure. So we are not looking at wind or biomass at this time. And the direction from the governing board in October was to largely remove barriers to solar infrastructure. During our outreach with stakeholders and some targeted outreach to consultants that actually install solar panels in the Tahoe region, a lot of the barriers stemmed from current scenic requirements and limitations on reflective materials on rooftops, which is directly related to solar panels today. It also included how coverage is calculated for ground mounted solar. Right now, the entire surface area of the solar panels would be considered coverage, even though they're mounted well above the ground, typically 3 feet or more, and don't impact drainage nearly as much. And there's just a very unclear permitting process for rooftop solar in particular, specifically in the shoreland area or the scenic corridors. From the consultants, this was just a very unclear process, and they couldn't articulate exactly what the process was. So it's kind of unique for each housing project. So that creates a lot of burden on the consumer and just generally increases the cost. So the goals for our policy recommendations were largely to streamline the permitting process, to clarify the code language in relation to solar energy infrastructure, and to consider solar energy and green infrastructure a enhancement to the community instead of a burden, to kind of shift that perspective on it. Our recommendations are to consider a qualified exemption for rooftop solar with an additional height or with an additional non-reflective component when it's in the shoreland or the scenic corridors to kind of address any of those reflective concerns that the public may have. To provide an additional height requirement when installing solar on rooftops. Include a partial coverage exemption for ground mounted solar, and this would be modeled after your current bare box language that kind of exempt bare boxes that are above the ground, but not the mounting structure itself. And then to include a health and safety consideration when removing trees for solar installation. And that's it at this time. Next slide.
The final focus area that we are bringing forward to you are dark sky standards. These recommendations are actually aligned with the current program going on in South Lake that is converting pedestrian lights along the 50 corridor to dark sky compliant lighting fixtures. This is also following the governing board priorities to update light requirements for efficiency and dark sky. And so this is our attempt. Some key issues that we found facing dark sky standards are the actual enforcement of the lighting standards, as well as overall basin-wide knowledge of the updated exterior light standards. Some limitations that we found while crafting this language are the actual proposed language itself is the minimum standard to meet the International Dark Sky Association requirements for the certification. There's a lot more language to consider, but this is definitely a good first step. There's also the issue of compliance and enforcement basin-wide with this language. Our long-term goals for the Tahoe Basin and TRPA is to become internationally dark sky certified. as well as to require efficient outdoor lighting. And so our overall recommendation is to add dark sky requirements to the exterior lighting standards, with two specific additions being that the color temperature of the lighting should be below 3000 degrees Kelvin, and the lighting output limitation should be held per land use. Next slide, please. And finally, to wrap it up, our overall recommendations are to work with local partners, consider requiring a transportation plan for temporary use permits that promote alternative modes, streamline the installation of EV charging stations, consider qualified exemptions for rooftop solar, and then also add dark sky requirements to the exterior lighting standards. Next slide, please.
All right, I'll take this one. So what's next? This is an informational item, so we want to hear from RPIC members on what you think. I really recommend taking a look, if you haven't already, at attachment A in your packet. It's a specific language that that we collaborated on with the student group. So eventually our goal is to bring this back to you as a code amendment. And we don't have a specific schedule for that yet, but we're interested to hear your thoughts. And I'll hand it back off to the group for one more thing.
To end, we wanted to thank you all for the opportunity for letting us learn alongside you. And we also wanted to extend the invitation to join our Policy Clinic Symposium, which is on June 8th from 11:55 to 12:40, where we will be presenting a similar presentation to our program and as well as the rest of the UC Davis community. And we would love to see you there.
All right, thank you guys so much. Thank you, one, for working with us to do this, and also for getting your degrees in this really impactful field going forward. It's great to see you coming up and working towards this better purpose. Any comments from committee members?
Sure. Thank you. It's great to have young professionals joining the planning efforts that we need so desperately in not just in Tahoe, but throughout. We need a lot of career professionals in this area. So thank you. I just had one question on the special events. I think that's a great idea. Did you consider different size events having different requirements? Did you dive into that detail at all? Because we have a lot of different kinds of events, whether it's performances or races or shows, boat shows, all kinds of different.
We haven't considered the size of events, but for City of South Lake Tahoe, they have within their major special events category.
Okay. So within those, the categories they currently identified.
Yeah, and so they have kind of like check boxes to say like include a map of like transit stops nearby, bike and ped access, and kind of just encouraging alternative modes.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think Shelley had a question, your comment too.
Along those same lines, I don't know how easy this would be to implement, but I think there's you can distinguish between events that are major in nature because of the breadth of the advertising. I mean, if events are attempting to bring people into the basin, that's one thing. If they're local in nature, I think that needs to be evaluated independently of the larger events. So that's kind of consistent to some degree with Cindy's comments. So I think we need to be able to make that distinction at some point. And I too want to thank you for all the work that you've done to bring this forward. With respect to the partial exemptions that you've recommended for the EV charging stations and for ground mounted solar, I mean, partial exemption percentage, 50%. I mean, obviously it has to be more specific in our code.
Yeah, for ground mounted solar, the idea was that the entire area of the solar panels would be completely exempt.
Okay.
But the mounting structure itself that goes into the ground, typically those mounting structures are about 3 feet in diameter. For the mounting pole, that would not be exempt from the coverage. But the surface area of the solar panels are typically 3, 4, 5 feet off the ground, that would be exempt.
So the mounting post, is that, I'm not that familiar with ground mounted solar, but is that greater than the footprint of an EV charging station or a bare box support?
I think it would be larger than the bare box support.
Okay,
I can't speak for the EV infrastructure because that varies based on the
charging capacity.
the charging capacity. Is it a high-speed charger? They'll simply have to have additional infrastructure built alongside the actual charging station itself. Where if it's a low capacity charger, it's simply just a small stand that works off the current energy infrastructure grid.
Okay, so these, Jacob, I'm assuming that these recommendations will be refined to include specific percentages with respect to exemption.
Yes, that's correct. And will also be evaluated for conformance and environmental performance. And I just would also add, we discussed a couple different ways to do a partial exemption for EV charging. One thing we talked about is finding, what is the average footprint of a level 2 charger? Seemed to be about 4 square feet, and then allowing, that standard exemption for up to, 4 or 5 chargers.
Okay. In connection with roof mounted solar systems, was any consideration given to requiring that all solar panels be made of non-reflective materials to minimize glare? I mean, just because, you have a solar panel on a house adjacent to where you live that is reflective, it could affect your quality of life as well, even though it's not in a scenic corridor. And I'm just wondering if an analysis was done with respect to the cost differential between using non-reflective materials versus reflective materials, and whether or not it would be reasonable to require that all solar panels that are roof mounted be required to use non-reflective materials.
That was considered, and it was definitely something that we went back and forth on a lot. It was our final determination that to only require the non-reflective materials where there are scenic standards that are influenced by it. If we wanted to apply it across and just make it a blanket requirement, I think that would be a reasonable requirement. Most of the solar panels that are installed in Tahoe are already made out of a low reflective material. So I don't think it would be an overly burdensome requirement to make, but we just didn't want to require it where it wasn't where we didn't see it as needed per se.
Right.
The main consideration was if you're not close to neighbors, say you're more out in the woods, why should we require you to have a non-reflective material if there's no one around to be impacted by it? There may be a consideration applied that if you're in a more dense neighborhood where it could be a nuisance to your neighbors, that could be a requirement, but we didn't want to require it where it had almost no impact to others.
No, I appreciate that. Maybe you could consider something, we could consider something like, an expedited approval process for applicants who come in with a roof mounted solar project, other than in a scenic corridor that uses non-reflective material. In other words, if you're using non-reflective material, there might be a bigger investment on your part. And we will expedite the process of your permit if you go that extra mile. Just a thought. And then Jacob, under 21.3.1, just me, the typo in the third line, I think you meant to say as opposed to home occupations.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. No worries. Let's see here. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shelley. Jessica, you had a comment.
Yeah, just a quick note. Great job, by the way. I graduated from UC Davis Law School, so go Aggies. I never went to a single sporting event, so sorry. I just taking a note from Shelley's usual book on precision on the first set of code recommended code amendments. Is there a word that you all are familiar with that encompasses bikes, scooters, wagons, other sort of, I don't want to say manually operated, because bikes can be electric and scooters can be electric, but something that's not just bike.
Alternative.
Yeah,
forms of transportation.
non-auto
Yeah.
forms of transportation, basically. I would recommend that for both 22.7 6B sections, just because they both say specifically bike. And would want to make sure that we're in the code being inclusive of all those modes of transportation. Strollers.
Great, thank you. And Alexis, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, great job. And I love to see students doing the real life work because that's really important. I have a question for Jacob on the event side of the world. For Washoe County, we do business, our events go through business licensing and then sometimes rise to the extent of going to the Board of Adjustment or a lower board that doesn't have to do with the Tahoe area plan. So how will we ensure that these get into all of our jurisdictional codes?
That's a really good question. We've discussed two different options. One would be more of a policy partnership option where we would work with your staff to figure out how to work that into your permitting system. The other option, which is not necessarily exclusive to that, would be applying these requirements to our requirements for a temporary use permit. So anything in Washoe County any event in Washoe County that would require a temporary use permit, maybe that would reach a major special event threshold, which per Cindy's and Shelley's comments, would then be subject to these requirements. So it's sort of we have a policy possibility and we have a regulatory possibility for how to enforce.
Thank you. And I'm happy to work through any of those through the Washoe County side, because I think this is a great idea. And then on dark sky, I just will note that this is something I just had a constituent reach out to me about in our casino area of Washoe County. And so I think we are barely meeting our dark sky requirement in that area because I reached out to code. So I think this will help us really fine tune those policies and requirements, especially because we'll be going through an area plan amendment on the Washoe side. So this is a great timing for us. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Great. Any other comments from committee members? Oh, great, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the presentation. Thank you kindly for it. You guys are having to deal with a lot of intricate issues. And with that, if there's any information you might be able to provide us prior to the vote on that, because, I look at the concept of exempting solar panels from like the reflectivity rule, wanting to maybe look into how much, if they did have the non-reflective, how much does that potentially decrease energy efficiency on solar panels? Because I've run into that in the past. We've had homeowners associations throughout Nevada that started to dictate they had to be terracotta color. And by doing so, that basically made them, non-functional. It took 40% of their efficiency away. So it'd be interesting to see your data on if you went to that, is that the issue that kills or prohibits people from solar, or does it create an increased cost in it, as well? So any information you could provide prior to us having to go to a vote on that, I would appreciate seeing. Even the discussion you had about the EV charging stations, you talk about the concept of having universal EV charging stations, and I appreciate and I agree with that. The worst problem is if we could force the industry first, that'd be great. That being said, I assume you're probably sticking to the two major ones, the JW32, as well as the Tesla charging one, which primarily make up the bulk 80–90% of the EV charging type stations. To require a total universal one, you'd have to have everything from ChemGo to hydrogen to, well, the list keeps going daily, which is a good thing. It's great that we're finding different alternative sources versus fossil fuels. That being said, I would like to hear a little bit further in the discussion, maybe when it's submitted to us, which ones you're considering universal, just to be a little bit nitpicky. And the discussion you had about requiring visitor travel plans, I assume that is only related to large events. I apologize. I had some legislative matters I had to deal with before getting here on time. But I see your head noddings and you're agreeing with that, because all of a sudden I walk in and the concept of requiring all visitor travel plans seemed a little bit, well, I'll leave it at that. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting that on the record.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from committee members? I had a couple. I I know in your presentation, you had a percentage of EV chargers for multi-use or multifamily projects. I was wondering where you got the number, if that's kind of industry thing, because I think we're in California, we're already, I think you had it at 10%. We're at almost 20%, maybe this year, but well over 20% EV adoption already. So where did that come from? And is that?
Yeah, that mostly came from the CalGreen language in California. The thing there was there isn't language in CalGreen about redevelopment. And so we wanted to ensure that the 10% was both new development. As far as I know, there's not a lot of new development going on here. And so we wanted to recommend that standard for redevelopment as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's something as we think about all these housing standards that we're proposing that we add to it. And I was curious if the solar is over a parking area or EV on a parking area, I mean, those seem like areas we'd want to incentivize it. And do you get any break on coverage there, or, I mean, or would we charge more for coverage? What's that?
Carports.
Yeah, like carports. I mean, you know, a lot of places when driving up, there'll be huge parking areas covered with solar. And if we've got to have huge parking areas, I'd rather have them covered with solar. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, we didn't propose this language in our package, but it would make sense to just, if it's over a area that's already covered, then it wouldn't add additional coverage to any calculation. The only things I could see is the mounting structures that would typically be on the outsides of the parking structures or the carports. But if it's all contained on what's already paved over, I don't see there being any additional coverage added to that. That's just my impression.
Yeah, I think we can explore, I think that's a great idea, and we can explore additional incentives to that type of solar installation.
Great, thank you. Any other committee comments? All right, then we'll open it up to public comment. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So anyone in person have any comments? Seeing none, we'll go to online. Oh, we got one. Thanks, John.
Push to speak. Can't miss that. Great job. I participated in one of the outreach discussions, and I'm excited about all these proposals. I hope we adopt them all as a starting place, and we continue to look at additional climate code opportunities. I think you've done some really thoughtful work here. I agree with Mr. Settlemyer there on concerns about adding too many barriers to adoption of, say, solar. It was worth noting that solar panels are designed to absorb sunlight, not reflect it, to generate electricity. I have never heard of anyone in the basin complaining about solar glare. You know, technology's improving, so I hope I would, from my view, we should be looking at ways to encourage it and not put up regulatory barriers in the way of it. And I think we can find ways to solve those problems, or it might be a problem that doesn't exist. And then on EV charging coverage, I think like solar, a lot of it is going to be on existing pavement coverage, parking lots, for where this new EV charging proposed. Perhaps we can look at ways to disincentivize through higher fees of parking that doesn't include EV charging, to mitigate for new EV charging, to keep the barriers to adding EV charging low. So kind of incentivize what we want and disincentivize what we don't want. And then finally, dark sky. We started to install dark sky lighting just last week on city lighting structures in the center of town, and kind of in line with our similar dark sky lighting requirements for city properties. So a huge fan of this. We haven't done a dark sky requirement for all private properties yet, but we kind of looked into this. But I think just, anything we can do to reduce that kind of light pollution and glare is a big step in the right direction. It kind of fits in with what we should be doing in Tahoe. So generally just great work, and look forward to having a chance at the board level to adopt these and others.
Great, thanks, John. Anyone else in the room? All right, then we'll go to online. Anyone, Catherine?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one hand raised. Doug Flaherty, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. While TahoeCleanAir.org generally supports the concept and informational report associated with the presentation today, TahoeCleanAir.org opposes the following item contained in the Climate Change Smart Update below, which is 61.1.4.C1. The proposed code language, if adopted by the TRPA, would continue to allow incremental adverse impact and degradation to the environment by allowing subjective and arbitrary removal of trees over 30 inches within the western forest and over 24 inches within the eastern forest without a region-wide cumulative impact EIS. Also, regarding events and the event transportation plan, I think it's good to have an event transportation plan, but the plan required part of that plan must address a roadway by roadway wildfire evacuation capacity evaluation, as well as winter peril evacuation. And lastly, the plan should comply with the Chapter 2 land use element NH-1.3, which NH for natural hazard. This is something the TRPA has failed to do per their own land use plan. And that basically states that you must inform visitors of the wildfire hazard associated with occupancy in the region. The TRPA continues to fail to warn visitors of the wildfire hazard, which is part of their own land use management element of the TRPA regional plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Catherine, anyone else?
Yes, one more hand went up. The name on Zoom is Development Program Washoe County. If you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Senior Planner with Courtney Wyke with Washoe County, and I just wanted to say thank you to the UC Davis team and TRPA staff for a collaborative effort in looking into these climate code updates, and that the county will be, as part of the area plan amendment that we'll be pursuing later this year, incorporating some of these recommendations, or at least considering them as part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
All right, then we'll close public comment. Any other committee comments? All right, then thank you again for all your work and for choosing this as a career. Yeah. So now we'll, since that was information only, we will move on to the next item, which is item number 5, discussion for proposed regional definition and minimum standards for mixed-use development. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 219 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on, or in Zoom, but to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. So Jacob, you're up again.
Yeah, never left. All right. My name is Jacob Stock, Senior Planner with TRPA. I'm going to keep this brief so we can have a discussion. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to give you a little background on the research that we've done into mixed use definition and standards. Mixed use is an important aspect of our regional plan. aimed at promoting a pedestrian-oriented development in town centers, reducing reliance on personal vehicles. It's come up recently through the Washoe Tahoe Area Plan. It's come up to this body actually twice recently. For the proposed amendments to that plan to allow a condominium subdivision. And it's important because the Tahoe Area Plan ties condominium subdivision in the Incline Village Town Center to mixed use development. So it's important that we know it, and we know and we define what mixed use means so that we're able to allow that benefit to occur in that plan. So through those discussions, RPIC and APC directed staff or asked staff to explore mixed use definitions and minimum standards that could apply in the Tahoe region. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do I mean by mixed use? The Urban Land Institute defines mixed use as development that fosters 3 or more revenue producing uses. This could be any number of things: retail, entertainment, office, residential. Uses that integrate, foster integration and density and compatibility of uses. So the uses within the development complement each other. Residents are patrons of the business, maybe they're employees even, and the businesses can rely on those residents as well. And then also, and importantly, from the regional perspective, mixed use can and should promote walkable communities. Next slide, please. So this image here kind of demonstrates this idea of mixed use promoting walkable or active communities. So a co-location of mixed uses can reduce VMT and dependence on private vehicles. It's because it makes it easier for folks to travel between home, work, school, recreation, et cetera, without the use of a private vehicle, because all of those services are provided within a smaller geographic area. And this kind of gets into the idea of complete communities, which you guys, we've talked to you guys about pretty extensively. So this is a smaller area community where all of the residents' needs can be met within a smaller physical area. And in order to make this happen, we need implementing regulations to do it right. Next slide, please. So we looked at what other jurisdictions are doing to define and set standards for mixed use. So this generally falls into 2 buckets. There's the definition, what are compatible uses, how are they located, and in what proportion of residential to non-residential. And then, but a definition is not enough. We also need minimum standards for design, access, and affordability in order to make those mixed use developments successful and meet those traffic reduction goals that we have. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is sort of reiterating the last slide. We took the research from other jurisdictions, we developed a definition, and we developed some minimum standards that I'll go over in this presentation. Next slide. Okay, so getting the right proportion and placement of residential and non-residential uses is really crucial to successful mixed use development. So that's where we started. We started with this definition. One thing that we've seen that's been very successful in other jurisdictions is requiring non-residential uses to be located on commercial frontage. And so we have an example in this slide of how of something that's been done elsewhere. This is Ketchum, Idaho. I think it's a pretty cool building that's being developed there right now. Next slide. So I want to talk about floor area ratio, or FAR, because this is an important tool that addresses the challenge of calculating density when you have different use types that require different density calculations located on the same parcel. So FAR is a ratio of the floor area of the structure to the square footage of the parcel. So for example, an FAR of 1 could be a 1-story building that occupies the entire parcel, a 2-story building that occupies half the parcel, or a 4-story building that occupies a quarter of the parcel. So other jurisdictions have had success using FAR to create a common language for building mass and density when you have different uses combined on a parcel. Next slide. So defining permitted uses is another important aspect of defining and regulating mixed use. We found that broadly allowing compatible pedestrian-oriented uses would be appropriate, particularly given that we're a regional agency. This is a regional code, and typically those that level of zoning is reserved to the area plans. So broadly defining what are compatible uses. Other jurisdictions also allow lobby space to count towards non-residential space if they're able to prove, if the developer is able to prove that retail or other active non-residential uses are inviolable. So that's something we may also consider. Next slide. So affordability is actually really crucial to the viability of mixed use development. The VMT reduction that you get from mixed use relies on full-time residents using the non-residential amenities that are co-located with their homes or nearby their homes. So as a result, a development that is all seasonal second homes wouldn't really support mixed use. So in addition to that, we have, as you know, a substantial unmet need for affordable housing, and the increase in luxury development actually creates a demand for more workforce housing. So including an affordable housing element within mixed use is really important, and it both addresses the affordable housing need in our communities, as well as allows mixed use development to be more successful and viable. Next slide. So you may not think of it, but parking is actually another crucial component of mixed use. High parking minimums can increase the cost of development. They divert space from other desired uses, and they can undermine the pedestrian-oriented nature of mixed use by creating pedestrian vehicle conflicts. So the placement of parking is also important. So it's something else that we should consider as well. But we're proposing or we suggest that we consider no parking minimums for mixed use. We found from our research that jurisdictions that have no parking minimums, this doesn't necessarily result in no parking. It just allows the market to produce the amount of parking that's necessary for a given development. And in mixed use, that's often less parking. Next slide. So generally detailed design standards are addressed at the local level. We don't have a big, thick design standard section in our code, but there are some standards that are crucial to the success of mixed use development. And so we wanted to consider those. Those include standards for ground floor height and facade that promote pedestrian accessibility, and standards that limit the conflict between vehicles and pedestrians. So that's the parking piece, that's sidewalks, other pedestrian improvements, ingress and egress as well. Next slide. Okay, we can skip this one to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so our next step is to establish a mixed use definition and standards for the Washoe Tahoe area plan. This will allow Washoe County to implement the existing policy, which ties condominium subdivision to mixed use development in the Incline Village Town Center. After we've done that, we'll be working with stakeholders, so planners from local jurisdictions, our non-government partners as well, to develop a regional definition and regional standards that could apply across the basin for mixed use. And we would bring that back to you all for your review and consideration in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, staff, for working on this. I know you've been working hard on this since it's been kind of rushed to get to us because of the impending project approval. So thank you for that. Any committee member comments? Alexis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I did hear from constituents that had concern that this was being rushed, but I do think that we need to remember that we can always change if we're finding that there's problems with these code requirements, and that Washoe County really, for some reason I'm getting feedback, but Washoe County does not, or according to the DA's office, we were not permitted to do these type of standards with our area plan amendment or require these of the developer when they initiated that amendment. So I think this really empowers Washoe County to ensure that we are doing the right development for the community. And I really appreciate the staff work on this, and looking forward to supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee members? Jessica and then Cindy.
Thank you, Jacob, for the presentation. It's very informative. I just had one question on the permitted uses section in the report and also in your presentation. You talked a little bit about having a broad and flexible definition because we are regional in nature, and I agree with that. I wondered if you had encountered in your research in any other communities some best practices around keeping it broad, but also having a level of specificity. Let's say you have retail, office, and residential, and then it ends up being all like luxury retail and then offices. So the people who are living there don't have anywhere to like buy groceries, so that you're not reducing VMT for the daily use of those people if they end up being retail that's attractive to tourists, or as selling tchotchkes that are beautiful but not useful in daily life. Are there any other areas that have sort of addressed that very specific need about groceries, dry cleaners, things like that?
Yeah, so great question. And actually that's on my list of research to come out of this, is how do we what are some examples of how other jurisdictions have promoted businesses serving locals, or businesses that maybe serve a particular need. One of the things that I've seen is, for example, in the first one that comes to mind for me is in the city of Los Angeles. They allow they use FAR as well, as we're recommending. They use an FAR bonus for defined community benefits. So one of those would be like daycare centers. That doesn't count towards the FAR calculation for those buildings if you build a daycare in it. So that's one method that I can point to.
Thank you, Cindy.
I was just going to mention, there's also a tie-in to VMT. So the more local serving retail you show, the reduced impact your project has. So there may be some ways to look at that issue, not just from the mixed use definition, but also how we provide an incentive to get that mix for VMT purposes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk about tchotchkes. I wanted to talk about real estate offices. No, in our various communities are very different. Obviously, Tahoe City is almost 100% walkable within a block of any development. So restrictions on might be different there than in South Lake Tahoe, where you have wide distances between areas of the town center. So I want to keep that flexibility, maybe eliminate real estate offices in some areas, on first floor retail in downtown, just because we do see a prevalence of that, and the town of Truckee recently dealt with that issue. But looking at the defined mixed uses, you didn't say entertainment. And there's some small scale entertainment like exhibit space and other things. Could that be incorporated into that non-residential first floor uses? I'm seeing more and more pop-ups, whether it's, axe throwing or, things that I don't want to participate in, but others, VR or other types of kind of more entertainment that maybe don't fit retail, or art galleries, those sorts of things that can still attract usage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion, and it must have been an oversight of mine in writing that. So thank you for bringing that up. And I just want to say too, that retail or that entertainment can be a great anchor for these town center areas. You see it all over the country, movie theaters, community spaces like that. So that's a great suggestion.
Great. And then I want to thank you again for taking a look at this so quickly, and point out that also on the workforce housing or deed restricted, just continuing to look at our different communities, affordable workforce, achievable, however we're terming that. Each community has different needs and income levels that they need to serve. And I want to make sure that we're as flexible as we can in looking at those standards. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. Anyone else? All right, Shelley.
Yeah, I just want to echo what everyone else has said. Thank you for bringing this back so quickly, because it was kind of a bone of contention that really needed to be addressed. Jacob, with respect to, it says TRPA should consider setting a minimum requirement, ground floor street frontage and mixed use developments be designed for pedestrian oriented non-residential uses. And then developers should be permitted to include lobby space as a non-residential use where retail is not viable. Would that also include a temporary sales office, a permanent leasing office? I presume it would, even though it's not specifically called out.
That's a good question. I'll look into that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, that would be great. And to a certain extent, I'm in the commercial real estate business. I mean, commercial real estate has taken a real hit in recent years due to internet sales and that sort of thing. So we do need to maintain a certain degree of flexibility to get these spaces rented to appropriate users. To a certain extent, the market is going to control what's viable and what isn't viable. So I think we should be, pretty permissive with respect to what's acceptable. And then I guess I had a question on design standards. And I'm not suggesting this be made a requirement, but when we're talking about sidewalks along commercial streets, they have to be a minimum width of 10 feet. I think we need to, covered sidewalk should be encouraged. I mean, we obviously have a lot of snow, at least we did last year. I don't know if that's going to continue or be kind of a thing of the past, but if we're truly interested in walkable communities, having covered sidewalks, I think is really essential. And as a good amenity, I think it will encourage people to shop there, especially during the inclement weather months. So I'm not necessarily insisting, or suggesting that it should be mandatory, but it should certainly be encouraged. Okay, and that's it. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, I have a few, as always. We've gotten a lot of comments in on this, and by the number of people in the room, I imagine there's a lot more online. We're going to have a lot more comment, and I've looked at a bunch of them, and I thought there were all of them are great, and some ones that I want to bring up. Relating to what you said about the market driving the retail, we got a bunch of comments about the lobby being made as part of that retail, or allowable as part of that retail space. And that's pretty common in communities. As a developer, if retail makes sense, you would try to get as much of it as possible because it's paying versus a lobby that is not paying you anything. So, but allowing for that still allows for that active street frontage and that you want. So I think that is good, and we are going to need to be as flexible as possible, like Cindy said, on what uses are possible in that retail, because who knows where things are going to go. They've already, internet has decimated most retail, and who knows what's next there. We had a comment about the blank walls requiring treatment, and someone recommended, or a couple people, about having it based on being over a certain size. And I think that's a great comment. The idea is that if we're suddenly getting taller buildings and they're up against property lines, that a lot of times in cities you get blank walls, and we don't want to have those. So if it is a large area, we can do that. Let's see. We had a bunch of comments about enforcement of deed restriction. And so I'd just like to hear about what we're thinking of in that area. And then we have a lot of comments about cumulative impact. And I just want to let everyone know again, I mentioned it once before a while ago, that we are not talking about increasing development in the lake. What we're trying to do is take it and squish it into our town centers where it becomes walkable, transit serviceable, where it replaces really poorly performing properties in terms of runoff and stormwater, lack of stormwater treatment, with properties that are brought up to code and up to date in that area, and doesn't increase the population or tourism or anything besides what was, or in addition to what was considered in the first, or in the regional plan update. So we're not talking about increasing anything. We're just changing its form. Right now, development's going on, but it's going on in exactly the wrong places and the wrong style. We're getting luxury developments. We're getting gigantic single family homes that don't serve the people who work here, and it's hurting our communities and our people. Let's see. So for me personally, I don't want to change any, I should have mentioned this in the South Lake Tahoe presentation, but unless our changes are going to get us more affordable or achievable housing, I do not want to change any of them. I don't want to give any more density or change any more, change the code allowances, because what we need in this basin is achievable housing for our workforce and affordable housing for the people who can't afford to live here. So, I think that for me applies to what's going on there, and applies somewhat to what we're talking about here. You can build a multifamily project in Incline Village right now, but if you want to build one that's for sale, then I think we have the need to request that some of that becomes affordable instead of just really luxury housing. On that note, I think any FAR increases, we need to tie that to the provision of affordable housing. And anytime in the future that we allow people to convert from commercial or hotel to residential, we need to tie that to that it only applies to affordable or achievable housing. And Cindy is right, we need to have a mix, and communities need to be flexible. And I think that's something that we're going to be working on, is allowing them to figure out what that can look like. And it might be an option for the developer, which a lot of cities use to provide some percentage of different levels of affordability to meet the minimum, to meet the requirements. And that brings me to the last point, which is just, I mentioned in the last presentation, or I asked them about whether they had done the analysis on what makes sense for the percentage of affordability that they're asking for, and whether these changes are going to actually incentivize market rate developers to do what they want. And I think I would like staff to look at what percentage of market rate residential developments should be set aside for affordable, moderate, and achievable levels to make sure that we are maximizing that. I think, we need more achievable and affordable housing than we have units left to develop in the basin already. So we want to make sure that we're getting as many of those as possible for the people who need them, who want to live and work in the basin. So those are my comments, and unless I see any other hands from the committee. Shelley, did you have one? Your light's on. So.
Oh. If you insist. No, with respect to FAR, Jacob, in your illustration, you had one parcel that was 100% covered. And obviously there are going to be people concerned about that. So I think we need to reinforce the fact that at the end of the day, we're going to stay within our code limitations and height limitations, that those are not going to be amended. Having said that, if you're developing an affordable housing project and it's 100% coverage on a site, given the scale being used, obviously that's going to require the importation of coverage, right? Or there's going to have to be a corresponding offset. Correct? So have we thought that through?
You might recall from the presentation at the retreat, we talked about maybe not using coverage, but using stormwater infrastructure, which achieves the same objective as coverage. So that might be, that's kind of where our consultants, Cascadia, said you need to go is if you really want to use the site, utilize the site, in addition to reducing parking, you may want to put in stormwater infrastructure along with sidewalks, curbs, those kind of things, and build the stormwater infrastructure so it captures all the runoff that you would have captured with the less coverage. So that's kind of where we're going.
Is that going to require a code amendment? I presume it would. As an offset.
I'm sure will require some environmental analysis. And
Yes, and that's what's happening in the, I'm forgetting the name of the initiative, Karen's initiative.
Tahoe living.
Tahoe living. So they're looking at height density coverage issues with regard to providing housing.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's a whole separate effort that's looking exactly at those questions and looking at environmental documentation that's
Okay,
that would
but
support that.
Included in that, there will have to be a financial analysis, because if you're working with the gentleman who spoke earlier in the meeting, apparently he doesn't use subsidies for developing affordable housing. I gleaned from his conversation. But others, it might affect his ability, depending upon the cost of the infrastructure improvement work, his ability to offer his services and develop, a parcel, even if it's 100% covered for affordable housing, if it doesn't pencil. So
And we just yesterday had a meeting with Shay Navarro, our water quality and watersheds program manager. They are doing some projects with public funding. I think you may have recall in the city of South Lake Tahoe's presentation, they talked about complete street and stormwater project that they're working on in state line. Those kind of infrastructure improvements that we may have to get public money for could be used as an incentive or as a subsidy. A lot of places, stormwater infrastructure is required with subdivisions. We don't do subdivision in Tahoe, so that's why we have to figure out a different way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to this discussion in the future and trying to balance it within the confines of people's property rights will be definitely an interesting subject. And James Settlemyer for the record, I also think it's important that when we have people discussing things on the record, just for those people listening, the audience out there in the ether, maybe we go ahead and state our names as we switch from person to person, just to be able to provide them that opportunity to know who's actually speaking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good points. Thanks. Any other comments from committee members? Great. All right. Well, then we'll go to public comment. So if any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So Lou.
Good morning, Mr.
It's already there.
Chair, committee members, Lou Feldman. I wanted to share some observations just generally. So TRPA has had a mixed use density component for decades. And recently a mixed use project was approved that garnered some conversation, the Latitude 39 condominium project, which has about 3,700 square feet of restaurant. And just by order of magnitude, and a residential condominium generates 4.5 trips or 21 VMT. And a 3,000 square foot restaurant generates 1,374 VMT. A mitigation fee for a residential unit would be $4,120 for this restaurant. Mobility mitigation fee would be $29,953, $30,000. By the way, the presentation that Jacob did, I thought was outstanding, and I wanted to recognize that. The idea that parking is negotiable, if you will, is an important concept, because in Washoe County, for example, there's one parking space per 100 square feet for a medium turnover restaurant, and a 3,000 square foot restaurant would require 30 parking spaces. And if you have a vertical development with subterranean parking, I'm sure that the chair knows this, the minimum cost you're going to get for covered parking, underground parking, $60,000 a space. So if you complied with that parking ratio, you'd be looking at $1.8 million just for the restaurant parking. So it's a slippery slope when we start talking about minimum floor area ratios for mixed use development in the basin in particular, because of the added cost to projects that, you know, may otherwise not advance environmental redevelopment. And so I like the idea, you know, generally speaking, of you know, including within the definition of mixed use some form of, whether it's achievable or other form of workforce housing. But I think this is a very slippery slope where the economics really need to be understood. And I don't think we have any economics other than I can tell you that applying the parking ratios that would otherwise be required would render these projects infeasible for the most part. And the chair's observation about brick and mortar retail, I mean, you know, you don't need to be a developer to know that, you know, this isn't the time to develop brick and mortar retail. So the components of mixed use are challenging now. And the economics then for what that mixed use can be to support any, you know, meaningful redevelopment is where the focus needs to be, or the status quo is going to prevail. And so I appreciate the opportunity to make these observations, and not sure that it's broken, that we need to fix it, but there appears to be a train that has left the station, and I respect that. But I certainly share Director Settlemeyer's comments about property rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? All right, Gavin. Oh, you guys keep fighting for mic time. So Gavin, you'll be next.
Sorry, there we go. Thank you. Hillary Roveru, Director of Development Services for the City of South Lake Tahoe. Thank you for bringing this forward. This is an important clarification item, I think, in the TRPA code, and I understand the need to bring it forward quickly. A couple of things I just wanted to mention, ensuring that these mixed use definition components are considered within the context of all of the other policy change discussions that are occurring. There was discussion about the Tahoe Living Working Group and their work on housing. You know, when you have a mixed use project, there's often one use that is offsetting value of another use. And that looks very different when the residential component of it is purely privately funded versus a residential component that is affordable housing utilizing public financing opportunities and funding. So as these definitions are being defined, wanted to make sure that we're taking all of that into consideration as well, which is primarily what the working group has been discussing. With respect to floor area ratio, would certainly like to be involved in those conversations. There's a lot of benefits to moving to floor area ratio as outlined in the staff report. You know, want to have a conversation about how that can be paired with a minimum density in areas where that's appropriate, in order to ensure that all of the allowable floor area isn't utilized for very low density, you know, a single unit in places where we really want to have higher density and smaller units. With respect to the inclusionary housing component, also very important strategy and attempts to develop more housing affordable to our workforce. Placer County already has an inclusionary housing ordinance in place. City of South Lake Tahoe is working on one. Our city council has gone through the process of preparing nexus and feasibility studies in order to determine what is that right percentage. Those discussions are ongoing. We expect our council will be hearing more information in that regard probably in August. So want to make sure that if there is an inclusionary component integrated at a regional level, that we're really in lockstep with the local jurisdictions that are doing that as well, to make sure that we're, again, not creating confusion about what the requirements are and making sure that those inclusionary requirements are appropriate for different places around the basin, and that they're developed in compliance with applicable state laws. So thank you.
Thank you. Gavin, I think you were next.
Good, thank you. Good afternoon, Gavin Feiger, behalf of League City Lake Tahoe. Great presentation, Jacob. We're in favor of most of this. As we were talking about, we spoke up in February and then again in April, talking about regional the regional plan and performance measures and benchmarks, and that we need bold action to reach them. We're very much supportive of putting our remaining development into town centers as much as possible, if not almost exclusively. And I think these mixed use definitions go a long ways in that direction. Definitely, we'll double down on some of the other comments. Need to have some flexibility, but this is also TRPA's role is regional, right? So maybe there's a baseline or a window that the different counties can kind of operate within. But I mean, truly, it is the role is to create some region-wide consistency and to keep pushing the envelope a little bit and make sure we're reaching our goals. And then FAR, really like the direction, but devil's in the details. So looking forward to see how that goes. And then also lining up with Alyssa and Karen's great work with the Tahoe Living Working Group. There's a lot of crossover between those. And then most of the area plans in Tahoe are being amended or updated this year. So with all the moving pieces, it's a great role for this committee to try to figure out how to get everybody to sort of meld them together as much as possible. That said, there are things like parking and some of the mixed use definitions we talked about today, inclusionary zoning, that can happen quickly and have a big effect. So while we're kind of ironing out how the rest of it all works together. Yeah, those are my comments for now. We're involved in all those working groups, so you'll be hearing from us. And heartache coverage is still giving us some heartache. So we'll get to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else in the room? All right.
Thank you, Steve Dolan. Mixed use and mixed message in a way. Earlier, you're talking about a minimum coverage, including 8 people or 8 units. And now you're talking about parking that has no minimum. And I believe Mr. Honeyman, Chair Honeyman, and Mr. Feldman were alluding to how the market will respond to parking and costs like that. And my understanding is that if development can go from the sky to hell, that's where the housing will be, and there won't be any parking. And that's a monetary concept, but the other reality about this with the minimum densities and minimum and no minimum parking is that I fought the Oakland fire. And the #1 problem in Oakland at that time was narrow streets and cars on the road. And if you don't have parking for cars, they're going to the road because it's a pie in the sky if you think that people aren't going to drive up here. We were just discussing the other day, there's no train access to the lake itself. Currently, we're trying to develop a transit system that's probably 20 years out. So when you start to think about these types of densities, and in fact, in incline houses are applying to shrink their minimum parking. which the fire department says, hey, that's just going out on the street and we won't be able to get by. It's a tragedy in the making. So I'd like you to consider these minimum values, both in density and in parking. I think that they're a little bit dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else in the room? All right, seeing no hands, we'll go to online commenters. Catherine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 3 hands raised online. First hand up was Christina Hill. Christina, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you. My name is Christina Hill, and I'm a former TRPA employee and have been a planning consultant for the last 40 years. And anytime I do any project, application requires that findings be made. And as with code amendments, and there's many being considered now by the agency, I'm not seeing any findings being made, and that makes me nervous. I don't see that the findings required under section 4 of the code that, demonstrate that the project or the amendment is achieving and maintaining threshold standards. And I think it's really important that when we look at these suggested code amendments, that the staff include written findings in the report so that we are assured that these new concepts and provisions are going to be in compliance with the threshold standards. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next hand raised is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, just generally, there's always this discussion that revolves around a statement without adequate or substantial evidence that these types of changes are going to result in attainment of affordable and or achievable workforce housing, et cetera. My comment is that the discussed desired outcomes to attain or obtain affordable and or achievable workforce housing are subjective, capricious, highly controversial, and the desired outcomes are highly unlikely. It would require, the desired outcomes would require TRPA to have a crystal ball to make such to substantiate such outcomes based on the lack of substantial evidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the last hand raised is Ann Nichols. Ann, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yeah, hi, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. First of all, I think we have to stop confusing everybody with this terminology. On Karen Fink's recent discussion in PowerPoint, she had workforce as where you usually see achievable. And then the lower income were affordable. So we need to keep it the same. You have workforce at the bottom, then you have affordable above that. This is just serving to confuse everyone. And we've realized that achievable was completely a joke because it was, 250% of the average median income. So you did fix that, which was great. But you gotta use uniform terms. Nobody will know what you're talking about. Right now in Karen Fink's PowerPoint, workforce is 180% of the average median income, which means it would be $1 million condo. So that's not what we need. So let's do that. Then the next biggest thing you could do is get rid of the two-step process. Because if you approve this, That's what's happened to our housing. All these multifamily zoning with the two-step process became luxury condominiums. So once you stop that, it's going to be a huge boon. That's why we never got any affordable multifamily apartments. That structure you showed, that picture of Ketchum, wasn't that lovely? You said it was beautiful. It was 3 stories. Do we really have to go so high to make this work? Do we have to go to South Shore levels of height? The full-time versus part-time, we have a unique economy. I mean, we could spend hours on this. You know, this is not something you can rush to decide. Just because 947 is coming up doesn't mean you have to crank something out that's not going to work, because maybe we can change it later. But the thing is, with 947, we need to figure it out. And we're tired of seeing, you know, oh, here's the mixed use. There's a place where you could deposit a check. So that's banking. No, that's not really fair. So, and I think he said 3 or more uses. There's so much to this, and I hope you guys will take the time to let's do this right instead of too fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Anyone else online?
Mr. Chair, there are no more hands raised to comment on this item.
All right, great. Then we'll close public comment and go back to the committee. Any other comments? Oh, Shelley?
Pursuant to James's suggestion, this is Shelley Aldine for the record. The problem with eliminating, this is in connection with Ann's recent comments, eliminating the two-step process is that you eliminate the opportunity for home ownership or for unit ownership. And I don't think we want to do that. I mean, yeah, some people would prefer to rent than to buy, but if they don't have the opportunity to subdivide a project that's affordable, then they'll never have an opportunity to take that next step and acquire something, which enables them to move upward. It provides upward mobility. So while I appreciate her comments, I do think that her comments regarding using, you know, maybe revising or narrowing our focus with respect to definitions is an important one, but workforce housing is not necessarily at the bottom rung. I mean, if you're looking at service jobs, you know, those pay less, but you're also looking at jobs like jobs with the fire department, the police department, you know, where those people are unable to afford housing within the Tahoe Basin. That too is workforce housing. So there is kind of a sliding scale. But to the extent we can refine our definitions, I think that's a worthwhile suggestion. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Shelley. Yeah, I've been really sloppy with that language. And I know I need to get better. So maybe we, at the beginning of everything, we put a term list for what we mean by affordable is subsidized or below market rate, achievable. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be just at a certain level. There's 50%, 80%. We're talking with achievable at 120%, I think, and workforce might have a different definition, whatever those are. Yes, even I'm confused now thinking about, but we know what they are when we see the proposals, but I've been sloppy with that. So it'd be good to have that. And I think responding to committee member Settlemeyer's comment about property rights, that we are not in any of this taking away rights. We are giving people incentives to incentivize the behavior that we like and want in this basin, which is more affordable housing, more walkable communities, more achievable housing for our workforce. So I think staff has been very sensitive to that. And I think everyone on the board will be as well. So any other comments, anything? Alexis?
I don't really have much more of a comment, but I do want to thank the chairman. You've done a great job of really ushering this through, checking in with your fellow board members. And I think you're doing an awesome job. And this is a huge achievement, I think, because otherwise, I think that we're not looking at Tahoe in a cohesive way. And so thank you so much for your leadership on this.
Thanks. All right. Any other comments? Yeah, we'll end on that. That's very nice. What time are we coming back? Oh, yeah, that's right. We have, shoot, I need to go back to my cheat sheet. All right. So that was also informational. So we will move on to our next item, which is committee member comments, agenda item number 6. Any committee members have any comments or questions? Anything that wasn't brought up? No? Oh, yeah.
Just a staff comment, Mr. Chair, Julie Reagan, Executive Director. I just wanted to let the members of the audience that are here for the Lake Spirit Award winners just to know that we are wrapping this up and we'll get the main meeting started quickly so that we can get to that item. We thank you for your patience and we'll be with you shortly.
Yeah, sorry, this is going long. So seeing no comments, we will move on to the next item. Our final, I got to put on my right glasses. I was wondering why I couldn't read this. Our final matter of business is our general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the Regional Plan Implementation Committee on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on that same topic. The Regional Plan Implementation Committee is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing items raised by the public during this public comment period. If any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand, either now in person or by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Anyone in the room wish to speak on this item? All right, seeing no one. Anyone online?
Mr. Chair, we have a few hands raised.
Okay.
Ann Nichols, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yeah, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. One thing, this is on the new multifamily code proposal by TRPA. And so Jeff Cowan said that the way you cap development in the basin is through height, density, and coverage, which was all increased in 2012 with the new regional plan. Now the proposal is to do this again, and it's outside town centers in the case of multifamily, which is all over, you know, Lake Forest, Tahoe Vista, Homewood, Incline Village, anywhere there's multifamily zoning. And the density would go to 60 units per acre from, actually it's 15, although Karen had it at 25. It's really 15 now, but it would go to 60. The stories and height would go up 37%. The change in density is a 240% increase. Coverage 75%. It would be up to 100% coverage from 70%. Setbacks are reduced and parking spaces are reduced by 66%. So this does in fact increase the population here, and it is outside of town centers. Thank you.
Thank you. I think John was going to respond to some of those
For
comments.
the record, John Hester with TRPA. The way we cap growth in the basin is through a maximum number of dwelling units, maximum commercial floor area, and maximum what we call tourist accommodation units, which are hotel rooms. And those have not changed and are not proposed to be changed.
Thank you. Catherine, next person.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last hand raised is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Speaking to the new family code proposals mentioned by Ann Nichols earlier, as referenced in the attached recap to my email, which is part of the record, regarding the informational flyer by the North Tahoe Preservation Alliance, TahoeCleanAir.org is opposed to TRPA's relentless efforts to further force adverse cumulative incremental impacts upon the Tahoe Basin without an adequate EIS discussing, among other adverse environmental and public health and safety issues, a roadway by roadway wildfire and winter peril evacuation capacity evaluation. Any increases in height, density, and coverage or setbacks will endanger the public by further exacerbating the current unsafe human and roadway overcapacity peril created by the TRPA during its 2012 regional plan update. Cumulative impacts result from the tyranny of the incremental impact of small decisions when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions, regardless of what agency or person undertakes such other actions. Cumulative impacts result from individually minor but collectively significant actions taking place over a period of time. These cumulative adverse impacts are dangerously supported by the pro-growth, pro-developer mindset of the TRPA and its partner counties. TRPA and its county partners are operating under an aggressive obsession to make area and regional plan code changes supporting increased height, density, and coverage. Such increased capacity will lead to already well-documented and unsafe current human and roadway overcapacity, adversely impacting both residents and visitors during wildfire and winter evacuation peril. And finally, while TRPA staff and the board may truly believe that they can prop up and support every single project or code change by referring to the 2012 regional plan, there's a lot of new information that according, and I want to get the code section right here. According to section 6.15 supplemental EISs and addenda to EISs, you guys must create a supplemental EIS to the regional plan, to the 2012 regional plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. Catherine, anyone else?
So we had one more hand go up.
Okay.
Carolyn Willett, if you unmute, you can address the committee. Carolyn, if you'd like to comment on this item, please unmute your microphone to address the committee.
Sorry, thank you. Struggling with my computer. My name is Carolyn Willett, and I am representing the Tahoe area group of the Sierra Club. And as the TRPA considers changes to the tourist core area plan, consideration must be given to the overall increases in the basin-wide density, traffic, evacuation, air, and quality concerns. The idea of allowing increased density because it is in a designated core area does not relieve these concerns. Our concerns are increased height, scenic view threats, bigger footprints, and obviously more density. With that comes a threat to the lake's clarity and air quality degradation. The overall impact of basin-wide developments must be considered. Cumulative impacts must be fully analyzed and quantified with verifiable evidence, especially considering the numerous development projects proposed in the basin. The plans that the TPA are considering include more retail, more restaurants, more services, etc., which will all require more employees and more housing. Estimates of the lack of affordable housing will continue to grow, while a small percentage of development is directed to what is really needed. As density increases, the dangers of evacuation during wildfires become more alarming, and the Howard dense downtown area is expected to evacuate. The public opinion has been consistent, protecting the environment, concern for emergency evacuation in case of wildland fire, and workforce housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commenters?
No, Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised.
All right, then we'll close public comment for this item. And now our final item, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, then we are adjourned. At what time are we starting the? Couple minutes. All right, we will start the governing board meeting in a few minutes.